Hello and welcome to our notes on Pythagorean theorem to find a leg. So you have already done a lesson on using the Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse in a right triangle. And so now we're going to be looking for one of the legs. So just as a quick reminder, for the Pythagorean theorem, we know that a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. And so we've been solving for this red piece right here. And now we're going to be solving for one of the two blue pieces. So we're either going to be solving for A or for B. And so every single time we're still going to highlight our hypotenuse so that we know we always plug that one across from the right angle in for C. And then we're going to plug in our legs for A and for B. Okay, so we've had practice just labeling right triangles with A, B, and C. We've had practice using Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse, which is the C value. Now we're going to use Pythagorean theorem to solve for a leg. So there's one more step of algebra involved in this lesson. So let's look at our very first problem. We are going to use Pythagorean theorem to solve for x in this right triangle. So Pythagorean theorem says that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So the first thing we're going to do every single time is we're going to find where our right angle is in our right triangle, and we're going to highlight the hypotenuse. That piece is always going to be my c value. So then we're just going to label it. We're going to label the other, just like before. It doesn't matter which leg you label A, and it doesn't matter which leg you label B, but you have to label the hypotenuse C. So this is our hypotenuse, and then these are our legs. This is a leg, and this is a leg. Okay? And we're just going to plug that into Pythagorean theorem. Okay? So I could have labeled this one B, and I could have labeled this one A, and it would have been just fine either way, as long as this one is C every time. So let's plug that in. That's going to be x squared plus 12 squared equals, what is my C value? 15 squared. So unfortunately, I have one extra step here. When we were solving for the hypotenuse, y'all were able to just immediately plug it into your calculator. But right now, we have to get x squared by itself. So how do we get x squared by itself? Well, think back to the lessons we did in solving equations. To get x squared by itself, you have to move everything to the other side by using inverse operations. So what is the opposite of plus 12 squared? The opposite of plus 12 squared is going to be minus 12 squared. So we're going to subtract 12 squared from both sides. And then we get x squared equals, and you're going to type this into your calculator exactly as you see it. So we're going to type in this whole thing, 15 squared minus 12 squared. If you are borrowing the calculators that I have from my room, let's see where the calculator's at. Here's how we type that in. You can use your phones, and I can come across the hall and show y'all how to do that if you need a reminder for the square root button. But we're going to type in 15 squared, so you'd type 1, 5, and then the x squared button, so that would pop up as 15 squared minus 12 squared, so 1, 2, x squared, so minus 12 squared, and then you're going to click enter. And when you do that, that's going to tell you what x squared is. So 15 squared minus 12 squared is 81. So that's going to give us 81. And then just like before, just like in our lesson the other day, you want to take the square root of 81. And so when you do that, you're going to click second, this blue button, and then you're going to click the x squared button, because right above that little teeny tiny right here is the square root button. So it should pop up like this on your calculator. It will look like this, square root. And we want to take the square root of 81, because we're going to take the square root of both sides just like we did before. And then you're going to click enter. So the square root of 81, what's going to pop up is 9. So your answer is x equals 9. Okay? So just like before, we want to make sure that that answer makes sense. So if our hypotenuse is 15, that means that these two legs for A and for B need to be less than 15, because remember that the hypotenuse needs to be the longest side in that right triangle, the biggest side. So the two legs should be smaller. So 12 is smaller, and if this is actually 9, if I went over here and actually put x equals 9, 9 is in fact smaller than 15 as well. So I know that that is a good answer. So just one extra step than what we did the other day. All right, let's try the second one. Okay. Again, the first thing we're always going to do, highlight your right angle. Here's my hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is going to be my C value. My legs are going to be the other two pieces. So I'm going to call this A, I'm going to call this B. And I'm going to plug that into the Pythagorean theorem, which says that A squared plus B squared is equal to c squared. So we're just going to plug in those pieces. X squared plus 8 squared is equal to 10 squared. So how do we get x squared by itself? What we're going to do is we're going to move everything else to the other side of that equal sign. So here's my equal sign. How do I move? What's the opposite of plus 8 squared? The inverse is going to be minus 8 squared. So minus 8 squared, minus 8 squared. And you end up getting x squared is equal to, typed into your calculator, 10 squared minus 8 squared is going to give me 36. And then if x squared is 36, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I know that x can't be 36 because that would be bigger than the 10. So it's going to be the square root of 36. So square root button, 36. If you are having trouble with typing this in, come grab me across the hall and I can help show you how to do that. I can also show you how to do it on your cell phone if you're working with your cell phone. All right, so x is going to be 6. The only other thing I want to do is make sure that makes sense as an answer. Is 6 less than 10 like I anticipated for the hypotenuse? It is. So the leg being 6 would be a good answer. All right, let's go to our next problem. Again, find that right angle, find the hypotenuse, and we're going to label it C, just like we did in one of our original lessons on this. So these are going to be my legs, so I'm going to label that A and B, and I'm going to plug this into the Pythagorean theorem, which says that A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. So let's do that. X squared plus 4 squared is equal to 5 squared. I'm looking for a leg, and so to get x squared by itself, I'm going to subtract 4 squared from both sides of this equation, and I get that x squared is equal to 9. So if x squared is equal to 9 and we want to solve for x, we're going to take the square root of both sides because that is the inverse operation of squaring something. When you type that into your calculator, the square root of 9 is 3. Okay. Does that make sense as an answer? It does because 3 is in fact less than the hypotenuse of 5. All right, number 4, we've got our right angle. So here's our hypotenuse, that's our C value. Here are our legs. That's going to be our A and our B value. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And then we're just going to plug in those pieces. So x squared plus 5 squared is equal to 13 squared. We are going to subtract 5 squared from both sides to get x squared by itself. You're going to type that into your calculator, 13 squared minus 5 squared. That is going to give me x squared is equal to 144. Now I know that that's not what x is equal to because 144 would be more than 13. That's what x squared is equal to. So what is the inverse of squaring x? It's going to be taking the square root of x. So then we get x equals 12. When you type in the square root of 144, you get 12. Does that make sense as an answer? Is 12 less than the hypotenuse of 13? Yes, it is. So the first 4 problems we did were just working with the process, the new part of solving the equation for one of the legs. But I do want to continue to review working with decimals and rounding as well. So these next 3 problems are going to have decimals in them, but it's the exact same process. We're just going to talk through rounding a little bit. And so here's our right angle. Here's our hypotenuse. So that's going to be my C value. And then here are my legs, A and B. I'm going to label this one A. I like to put my variable as A every time. It just makes it a little bit easier and it makes the process for solving the equation the same. So we're going to say x squared plus 8.2 squared equals 16 squared. So again, we want to get x by itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract 8.2 squared from each side of this equation. And so your calculator will do that for you. This part is not that different. You get x squared equals 16 squared minus 8.2 squared is going to be equal to 188.76. So how do I get x by itself? We're going to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of 188.76 is going to give me exactly 13.73899 ... If we wanted to round this to the nearest tenth, that's this number right here. So we're saying, what is this about, or what is this approximately? The number behind that tenth spot is going to tell us whether we should leave this as 0.7 or whether we should round it up to 0.8. Because this is 3, this is closer to 0.7 than it is to 0.8. If this is a 1, 2, 3, or 4, we leave it on the same level that it's at, so we'll leave it at 13.7. If this were 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, that's when we would round it up. So if it's a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, we're going to leave it at about 13.7. That's closer to 13.7 than it is to 13.8. So does that make sense as an answer if x is about 13.7? Yes, because 13.7 is still less than 16. So that does make sense as an answer. So we're going to continue to practice working on our rounding skills. All right, so here is on number 6. Here is my right angle. So here is my hypotenuse, the longest side. That's our C value. And then here are my legs. I'm going to label those A and B. And I'm going to plug that into the Pythagorean theorem, which says that x squared plus 7.6 squared is equal to our C value, 12.8 squared. So I want to get x squared by itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 7.6 squared from both sides. That's the inverse. And then I'm going to pick up my calculator. Both of these are decimals this time. And so I'm going to type that into my calculator. 12.8 squared minus 7.6 squared. 12.8 squared minus 7.6 squared. And for x squared, we're going to get 106.08. So I want to solve for x, so I'm going to take the square root of that. So type that into your calculator, square root of 106.08. Here's exactly what's going to pop up. 10.29951 ... So instead of just writing that whole thing down, oftentimes in the directions I will ask y'all to round, either to the nearest whole number, to the nearest tenth, or to the nearest hundredth. To the nearest tenth is going to be one spot after the decimal. And you're going to look behind it to see whether if that's closer to 10.2 or if it's closer to 10.3. Because this is a 9, that's going to be closer to about 10.3. So we are going to round the 0.2 up. If it were a 6, 7, 8, or 9, it would round up to 10.3. If it were a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, we'd leave it at about 10.2. Okay. So does this make sense as an answer? Is 10.3 less than 12.8 like I expected? Yes, it is. So that does make sense as a value for the leg. Okay. One last example where we have two decimals again. So here is my hypotenuse. That's going to be my C value because here's my right angle. And then we've got our legs. We've got our legs, which I'm going to label A and B. So again, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And we're going to plug in these decimal values. So x squared plus 12.7 squared is going to be equal to 15.6 squared. So how do I get x squared by itself? I'm going to subtract the 12.7 squared from both sides. So minus 12.7 squared on the left, and that cancels out, and minus 12.7 squared on the right. So we're going to type that into our calculator to see what x squared is equal to. 15.6 squared minus 12.7 squared. That is going to be equal to 82.07. So that's what x squared is. So to solve for x, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And what pops up exactly is 9.0592 ... We want to round it to the nearest tenth for this set of directions. So this 5 is going to tell me that that is closer to 9.1 than it is to 9.0. So we're going to round that up. 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, I'd stay at 9.0. 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, we're going to round that up to about 9.1. So does that make sense as an answer? Is 9.1 less than 15.6? Yes, it is. And so your practice is going to be on IXL, and I'm also going to do a check-in with y'all later this week to see how you are doing. So let me know if you have any calculator questions or if you need any help with these assignments. I hope that you are having a fabulous day.